What is up, guys? We are back again. Joey here, bringing you this weekly edition of Edge. I'm sorry that this is coming to you guys later in the week. I promise I will not let that happen again, but I do want to tell you there has been a ton of craziness going on, and I have not had the chance to get back into the room and record. And so while this is a late edition of Sunday Edge, my prayer is that you will still join us Sunday. Join us for small group, talk through all of these things, because this idea of God's love is huge. And walking through what that love looks like is going to be what we do today. Now, if you haven't, before we jump in, just want to run through one quick announcement. If you haven't connected to our Instagram page, that is going to be where you get all of our news, notes, and updates. It is at GSM Laredo on Instagram. Now, we also have the Edge community on Instagram at Edge Laredo. And so those are two places that you can go to find information about Edge, about our weekly meetings, and any updates that may be coming to you. Another super awesome thing that we have going on here at Grace Bible Church is we are kicking off our Spanish services. Those are going to be falling in the 9 o'clock slot. So we are still working through some discussions, but just be on the lookout for possibly one, reopening, and two, possibly adjusting time slots. Those are things that are coming. We'll get you those news and notes through the Remind page, which you definitely got if you're here, and through our Instagram pages. With that being said, let's dive in to talking about God's love. Have you ever thought about how awesome and amazing God's love is? It might have been a passing thought. It might have been like, man, God, you are fantastic. Man, you are amazing. Man, you are awesome. And all the things that you've done for me are great. But have you ever really sat and pondered and thought what that love truly looks like? Have you ever given thought to how truly sacrificial it is? Today, we are going to be walking through a few passages out of the book of Romans that walks through, one, how we are saved, two, why we are saved, because obviously it's got to point back to God's love, and three, what our response is to that, or at least what it should be, what we need to do, and then what we do after that. So we do have a ton of ground to cover. We are jumping into the book of Romans, which is the fifth book of the New Testament. Sorry, sixth book. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans. Sorry, not thinking today. My brain is all over the place. So it is in the New Testament, sixth book of the New Testament, and the book is Romans. We are in chapter 5, and we are walking through verses 6 through 11. For a while, we were still weak. At the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. Let's just pause right there. This idea that Christ died for us is kind of the linchpin about us understanding how truly deep God's love is for us. You see, God knew there was a standard that we could not meet. He gave us the law in the Old Testament. He handed it to Moses. He said, here you go. Here is all the law that you have to follow. And he knew that there was no way that we, as broken, fallen, sinful people, could totally live up to that. I mean, it started with 10 and it worked its way up to 613 different laws. And every law had a punishment or a penance that had to be made, an animal that had to be killed, because the wages of sin are death. And so one of the things that we see is the law was actually given to us to show us how truly ungodly we are, how truly sinful we are. And so we jump back into verse 7 because Christ died for us even though we were ungodly. Verse 8 is going to show us that truth again. It says, verse 7 says, for one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. Very rarely do you see people dying even for good people. Maybe you see people taking a bullet for the president or something along those lines, but just for the regular, ungodly, broken people, it's very rare that you see that happening, especially if they're not related to you. Verse 8, this is the big, huge, awesome verse where we talk about God's love. But God, and I love those two words when you put them together. But God means it doesn't matter because God had a better plan. God had a better idea. God was going to do something way more awesome than we could have ever imagined. But God shows his love for us, showed us how truly deep his love for us, the ungodly, was, in that while we were still sinners, while we weren't even good people, we weren't even okay people, we weren't even bad people, we are horrible, right? No one is righteous and no one is good by themselves. That's in Romans 3. It says that while we were still sinners, while we were still these just truly horrible, wicked, disgusting people, Christ died for us. God showed his love for horrible people, us, because Christ died for us, even though we were still sinners. Man, if you ever want to ponder how deep God's love is for us, take 1 second and really think through this verse. He showed his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. His love for us is sacrificial. It is selfless. It is giving. It is gracious and merciful. And it's amazing because he gave us the opportunity to be redeemed. Verse 9 says, since therefore we have now been justified by his blood. Now, justified is a big fancy term, right? Forgiven, because we have been forgiven by his blood. Much more shall we be saved by Jesus from the wrath of God. Put that together. We had to be forgiven, because if we weren't forgiven, if we couldn't live up to that standard that God gave us, the law that God gave us, if we couldn't do that, then we stood to be judged by God. We were under his wrath, and we were waiting to be punished. But because Jesus came and died for us, for sinners, we were forgiven, and now we are not waiting to be judged. We are actually given Jesus's perfect record, and we are brought in to God's family. Once again, this is how amazing God's love is for us. Just to flesh this picture out one more time, verse 10 says, for if we were enemies, we were reconciled by God by the death of his son. Much more now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life. His death forgave our sins because his life was perfect. More than that, we also rejoice in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation. Because we are now forgiven sinners and brought into God's family, we have peace with God because we no longer are waiting to be judged. We are no longer standing to be condemned. We have peace with God because we have been made right with God by the blood and the life of Jesus. God did that for us. He made a way for us to be restored and brought back and forgiven, to be good enough for him, because we couldn't do that on our own. Another way that we can see this, right? This just a huge picture, big picture understanding. We have all sinned. And Romans 23 and 24 says, for all have sinned. Now that word all is exhaustive. It means everybody has sinned. We've all gotten angry. We've all been greedy. We've all done things out of pride. And all of that is sin. All of that is pointing back to us for sinful purposes. And so, because we have all sinned, we all fall short of that perfect standard that God gave us. Like I said, there is no other way for us to have been redeemed. And we are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Jesus Christ. this idea that Christ died for us really should bring us closer to him, because through that death, through his perfect life, his death, his resurrection 3 days later, and his ascension into heaven, he is now sitting at the right hand of the Father, interceding for us, saying, God, don't judge them, because they are now in me. They are now holding on to my record because we have faith in him. And so that is how we are saved. We are saved by that truth that we just saw there. We are justified by his grace. But what are we supposed to do on our part? We see that in like Ephesians, but Romans 10:9 actually talks about that too. Romans 10:9 says, because if you confess with your mouth, if we say that Jesus is Lord and we believe in our hearts that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. That's two parts, right? We have to confess with our mouth and believe in our hearts. The crazy thing is there's a lot of people that want to kind of hedge their bets and they only confess with their mouths, but they really don't truly believe it. They really don't truly submit themselves to the Lord. And because they don't do that, they're still actually standing to be condemned. There's no true peace there. There's no reconciliation or restoration there. Professing faith just doesn't do that. And by professing faith, I mean just saying it. Believing, possessing faith, that's what actually saves us, right? It's the two parts together. It's repenting, that confessing, and believing in our hearts that Jesus is who he says he is. That is when we are truly saved. For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved. That's verse 10. See, we are saved by those two things together, but that's not where it ends. See, the amazing thing is God has even called us to share his love with others. Because he loved us, we are then called to love others. So our job as believers is to point people back to that love that changed us, that transformed us, that redeemed us. And the way that we do that is by sharing the gospel, by helping people understand that they are standing to be judged. And it is only by Jesus's perfect life, death on the cross, resurrection, and ascension into heaven that they can be redeemed. That's the only route that we can take. And the way that we take that route is by confessing with our mouth and believing in our heart. So because God has given us this amazing, amazing grace, we are now called to go out and share it with others. And so as we land this plane, as we close and wrap up, I've got two questions for you. First of all, have you confessed with your mouth and believed in your heart that so that you can be saved and justified? The second part is, if you have done that, are you sharing that love with others? Are you pointing people back to that kind of love that God shows? And are you even living it out in your own personal life? We'll never get it perfect. I'll be the first one to admit I have broken every law that there possibly could be. And yet my heart is still to seek after the things of God and work to be better every day. That's the whole idea, right? Is that we are not perfect, but we point others to the one that is. And so, are you living it out? Are you pointing people to Jesus? And have you confessed and believed in your heart? Because that's really the only way that we can be saved. Those are 2.5 questions, because I kind of added an extra one. Those are 2 questions that I want you guys to be thinking about as you get ready for small groups on Sunday. And those are 2 things that I want you to talk about in those small groups, because ultimately that's where the rubber meets the road. That's our part as we go forward as believers. Guys, I love you, and I will see you all very soon. Laters.